Hello. So I'm going to be presenting my case study on Jonathan, a 45-year-old cisgender heterosexual man who was referred to community health by his probation officer following his second DUI. He grew up in rural Michigan, completed a degree in mechanical engineering, and works in a manufacturing management firm for about 15 years before he lost his job 3 years ago. He identifies as loosely Catholic but is largely disconnected from his faith. He was married for 12 years and has two children, 14 and 11, who live with their mother, and he has supervised visitation every other weekend, which he describes as the only thing I have left. He lives alone in a low-income apartment, carries a lot of debt, and has almost exhausted his unemployment benefits. So some of his trauma history includes the fact that he had grown up with an alcoholic and physically abusive father and witnessed domestic violence throughout his childhood. He minimizes this history and has never really engaged in therapy, and his younger brother died by suicide 9 years ago. Something that he's never really fully processed and says, I'm not ready to go there. Some provisional diagnoses include alcohol use disorder, major depressive disorder, and needing to rule out PTSD, complex PTSD. So his presenting concerns and goals: he is drinking daily, almost up to an entire bottle of whiskey on heavy days, and describes it as the only way to keep my brain quiet. He presents with a low mood, isolation, poor sleep, and deep shame around his divorce, DUIs, and perceived failure as a father. He is mandated, but underneath that guardedness, he expresses that he is simply tired. His primary stated goal is to keep his relationship with his kids, and he also is not yet committed to full abstinence. Some of his strengths include intelligence and self-aware in moments, with a dry humor that surfaces as a genuine point of connection. His love for his children is a clear motivator. He's resourceful, and because he's kept his apartment, and he's met his probation requirements and showed up to therapy. So how I would build a rapport with a client like this would immediately to address any judgment or for anything judgment for therapy that he has, meeting him with curiosity, uh, directly naming the coercive referral and without resentment, and following his lead on pace will be really, really essential for a case like this. Affirming his strengths and resisting the sort of fighting that is like in the space. One of the main goals is to really center on safety, not necessarily getting him to have a full behavior change, like getting him to quit drinking alcohol. Longer term is stabilizing his mood, reducing harmful drinking, meeting him where he's at, especially because he's not intending on being abstinent. Excuse me, and processing grief and trauma when the therapeutic alliance can hold it, and rebuilding his identity and his connection to himself beyond and outside of the losses that he's experienced. In terms of assessing him for safety, I would consider his brother's suicide. I would consider his social isolation. I would consider the heavy alcohol use, sort of this hopelessness from all of the loss that he's experienced, put him at an elevated and high risk. I think that suicidality should be assessed directly and consistently, not just something that happens at the beginning, but continuing on with multiple checkups within the ongoing relationship, and sort of collaborating with him to come up with a safety plan, in case things turn out differently. So, in regards to looking at his alcohol use, I would begin to work with him to conceptualize that alcohol functions as a regulating presence in his life shaped by an early attachment disruption, and the cultural messages that he's received in his life that having needs is a sort of weakness. Working with him to understand that his shame is not a weakness. His shame is actually something that is organizing, something that is helping him in order to manage the pain and the loss that he's experiences. Because of the fact that his grief is mostly unprocessed, and the drinking is both a coping mechanism as well as a primary generator of future losses. In order to work with a client like this, I would really want to understand how we can address the depressive cognition as well as the drinking triggers, as well as the alliance builds. I would work with him definitely from a trauma-informed lens and trying to build his window of tolerance for it. I definitely invite him to think around his values, his kids, competence, integrity, rather than all of the things in his life in which he's working to do in order to avoid feeling that. Case management with this case looks like working with him with employment and legal support, as well as helping him find sober connections in his life, not just in his periphery, and definitely addressing the material conditions as part of the clinical work. What he's experiencing is not a result of his own incompetence, but rather a failure of a system at large, a system that fails to protect children. And so getting him to understand that he was just a child and that he is responding to an unsafe world, unsafe conditions, and that what he's going through is actually his survival is something that is highly intelligent, and getting him to understand that is definitely going to be a part of the core clinical work.